Special Committee for Redistricting. We're here in the first of our 5 town halls. We're going to start the meeting with the Pledge of Allegiance. Mr. Gottlieb, would you like to lead us in the pledge?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Robin, would you please take the roll?
Yes. Co-Chair Wolf.
Here.
Co-Chair Grant.
Here.
Legislator Cornell. Legislator Earl. Legislator Osteen. Legislator Johnson. Legislator McGowan. Legislator Paul. Legislator Soskin. Legislator Collier. Legislator Yeager.
Okay. We do not have a quorum, but there's no action that's going to be taken tonight at this meeting, so we can proceed with our discussion. I'd like to note that County Legislator James Foley has joined us. He's not a member of the committee, but he's here because he's an interested party. This is, as I mentioned, this is the first of 5 town hall meetings. All of our meetings will be recorded by a stenographer, so we'll have a complete record for the end of the process. Some people may be aware that from time to time, these redistricting plans are challenged in court, and we expect to have a complete full record of all of our efforts here. We'll also be recorded by staff on a video camera, so we'll be doing that as well for each of the 5 town hall meetings, just as we would if we were conducting these meetings in chambers. From the roll, you can tell there are 11 members on this special committee. It's fairly well balanced between the majority and the minority. Alden and I will be the moderators, the co-chairs of the meetings going forward, and we'll be assisted with 𝗖𝗂𝗯𝗶𝗰 𝗙𝗂𝗆�political strategies, who is the subject matter expert that will help us draw the maps and meet the legal standards that are required. We have a complete staff here, and I want to thank our staff for getting everything together. We have Orangetown, Robin Brooks is with us, 𝗖cie𝗿𝗺𝗺𝗏, Mary Whitmer, we have Alana Yeager in the back, and the Pat's with us as well, Pat Withers, so we're happy to have them here tonight. We do have a handout for everyone, the very colorful handout the staff put together for us. We don't have a PowerPoint presentation for that tonight, but just run through it very quickly. You'll see that we're being assisted by the Rockland County Planning Department. We're working in cooperation with the Commissioners of Elections. And again, we have a staff in-house consultant helping us. We have a timeline. We had our first meeting in May. Public forums will be this month. In June, tonight, it's in here in Orangetown. Tomorrow night, it'll be up in 𝗣𝗳𝗄𝗏, and then we'll get 𝗪𝗪stown, Stony Point, and Ramapo in before the end of the month as well. We'll work together on the proposed plans. Phil will meet individually with the county legislators to discuss their districts as they currently exist and what their concerns are. We'll have a public hearing, a formal public hearing in the legislature on our draft plan. And then once we've adopted a local law establishing the new legislative districts, we'll work with the Board of Elections and the Planning Department to get those out. Our primary goal is to make sure that each district, as closely as possible, meets the one person, one vote standard, so that there's equal representation across the county. We currently have 17 county legislative districts. That number will remain unchanged. What changes is the number of people that are represented. We're going from about 18,000 up to 19,918 roughly. You'll see it in your presentation packet that there's the 2010 data, census data for Rockland County. It shows how each of the 5 towns have grown. The population of the county has grown by about 28,000 people. There's another page that shows the existing districts. It shows what the estimated population is based on the 2020 census. what the ideal population for a legislative district is, and what the differences currently, the deviation from that. I mentioned that Legislator Earl has joined us. Legislator 𝗖cie did call me, say he was coming into the meeting. He is ill tonight. We're going to excuse him from the meeting. Our guiding principles are essentially the same guiding principles that we used 10 years ago. We were able to identify those through the Brennan Center for Justice. It's to minimize population deviation between districts, comply with the Federal Voting Rights Act and New York State laws, create contiguous districts, establish compact districts where possible, and consider the needs of communities of interest. And Phil will tell us about communities of interest in a little while. Since the last redistricting was done, New York State actually adopted a law. They codified these and actually prioritized some of them. So we're going to minimize the deviation between legislative districts, comply with the Voter Rights Act, create district, and you can read on in this packet and get a little more detail on that, and Phil will certainly address that as we go forward. And I think that's enough to start. Walden, is there anything you want to add? Any comment you'd like to make at this time?
No, I want everyone to know that Legislator Brandt co-chaired our effort 10 years ago, and that was an effort that resulted in a bipartisan adoption of a plan that met all of our goals, that complied with the law, was not challenged in court, and we're hoping that everything will go as smoothly this time as it went then. So with that, I'm going to introduce, we could call up our consultant.
Certainly. We have 𝗖𝗂𝗯𝗹𝗶 here with us tonight. Phil has been a part of crafting our plans for this will be the third time, I believe, third time. Phil is a subject matter expert on redistricting and the rules that pertain to it. What we're here for is to see what's important to you and your community, what other criteria you would propose to be included in the committee's deliberation, what other resources you think the legislature might need to make this successful. Walden mentioned that I co-chaired the last one, and we met all the conditions for a good redistricting process. The vote there in the legislature on the final plan was 15-2, and there was very little disagreement on the final plan. I think the focus there was that folks in Nanuet thought that they should be included in a single district. We just weren't able to accomplish that and meet all the other criteria. So Phil, you want to take it away?
Sure. Thank you for joining us this evening. I'm going to show some slides on the wall over there.
That's a very important slide.
It's a very important slide. As you can tell, I'm a Yankee fan. I hope I'm not offending any Mets fans in the audience tonight. First, I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I'm a geographer by trade and vocation. I've been doing redistricting work since back in the 1980s, believe it or not, and I have done county legislative, city, and municipal redistrictings, as well as working on some state level redistricting in New York as well. So that's me, 𝗖𝗂𝗯𝗹𝗶, geopolitical strategies. It would be nice if redistricting was more often than every 10 years as far as I'm concerned, but you guys are fortunate that it's only once per decade. It's a difficult process to go through. And we're going to take a step through it right now. So this is just a basic overview map of the county of Rockland. I'm sure everyone is basically familiar with it. You have 5 towns and a whole bunch of villages. This isn't showing too well because it's so light out still. Darn it being 9 o'clock at night before the sun goes down, with respect to these hearings. But basically this shows all of the districts and the election districts within them And we have to be cognizant of what effect this will have on the administration of the elections afterwards. So I'm going to try and take into consideration how best to make changes without creating difficulty for the election, for actually holding the elections and for the voters. Next. So this is a simplified map that shows the legislative districts laid over the towns. It's a very basic view, which you can't see too well on this screen. I'll jump ahead. This gives the population figures after the 2020 census. What I've highlighted here is how things have changed in the demographics of the county as well as the overall figure. So overall, there's been a change of 8.5% increase in population in Rockland, but it's not distributed evenly. Among the Hispanic population, there was a very significant increase, almost over 35% in the county. The Asian population grew at a rate of 7%, and most of the other non-Hispanic groups declined a bit over that time period. And the effect it's had on the individual legislative districts, zoom in a little bit for you here. So these are the current members and the 17 county legislative districts. I'm going to zoom in here so you can see the population in the districts are as follows. So it ranges from under by as low as 13% in District 17 to overpopulated from what it needs to be by almost 21% in District 7. District 6 and 7 are both over by a very high amount, around 20%. A number of districts, including District 1, under by 9%, and districts over here, 16, 17, are under by in or around just over 10%. There's another district that's over by 9%, that's District 4. So you can see there's a lot of shifting that's going to have to take place within the county. So even though there's population growth county-wide, it wasn't all in one part of the county. I mean, it wasn't spread out evenly throughout the county, and that's why we have to do the redistricting.
Phil, could I just interrupt for a minute?
Sure.
I apologize. Just want to mention that legislators Yeager and 𝗖𝗂𝗯𝗹𝗶, who are members of the committee, have all joined us for the discussion. Thank you.
Then we have the demographic breakdown of the population by race and ethnicity. These are the categories that the Justice Department is particularly concerned with. And you can see here, I'll zoom in a little bit. So you can see that if you just work off of the non-Hispanic white population, you can see that there are a number of districts where the white population is a minority. Those include districts 13 and 14, which actually has no clear majority of any particular demographic group. It's this line over here with Legislator Weir, Legislator Paul. A little too far here. Back it up. And you can see that in those districts, there is about a third is non-Hispanic white, just under 30% is Hispanic, about around 25% is non-Hispanic black, anywhere from 5 to 10% is Asian. So it's those districts are very mixed, and it will be likely that those will probably stay that way. The one district that we need to be mostly concerned with is District 3 from a Voting Rights Act standpoint. That is currently at 64%. That's this one over here, 64%, third one down, Legislator Hood's district, 64% Hispanic origin. And that's significant because the Voting Rights Act does not allow backtracking where it's possible to maintain the majority population of a minority group. So we will have to make sure that we maintain a majority Hispanic district in that area. Beyond that, there's no other district that has over 50% of any one minority group. You can see here they all range, other than that one district. None of them is more than 37%. That's the highest one that has a Hispanic concentration of 37%. There's one district that has a non-Hispanic Black population of 31%. So those are two areas. It's actually the same. Those are areas that we will be cognizant of, but as far as Voting Rights Act, unless there's a way of creating a non-Hispanic Black district in that area, which I don't believe there is, we'll see as we continue. From a Voting Rights Act standpoint, we probably won't be making an effort to create a minority non-Hispanic Black district. That said, there's a community of interest, and we'll get into community of interest in a moment. Those are federal requirements that I'm discussing right now. State requirements are a little different. So state requirements, there was a new piece of legislation that was signed by the governor on October of 21, just this past fall, relating to county and municipal requirements for redistricting. And this will definitely affect us. This is not something we had to deal with 10 years ago or 20 years ago. And these changes lay out the order in which the priorities of the different criteria that are being used. So very quickly, the most important ones, number one is population equality. I'll get into that in more detail in a moment. That districts shall not be drawn with the intent or result of abridging the equal opportunity of racial or language minority groups to participate in the political process. That is new to New York State, so that goes a step beyond Voting Rights Act requirements. Then we have, it shall consist of contiguous territory. That's contiguity. When you hear that term, that just means that you can go from one part of the district to another part of the district without leaving the district. Then you have, it needs to be in as compact a form as practicable. Now, the word as practicable is important here because we want to take into consideration other factors, and sometimes it's just not practicable because of the shape of villages or communities of interest or what it borders. Sometimes the shapes look a little odd, but it's done in order to achieve other objectives. And then we get into the more complicated area where it gets into, it shall not be drawn to discourage competition or for the purpose of favoring or disfavoring incumbents, either way. You can't benefit them through this process. You can't hurt them through this process without having a just cause for doing so. So that's where all the other elements come into play. So if legislators are upset with how things turn out, it's not because they're being targeted. If legislators are thrilled with how it turns out, it's not because they're being favored. It's because that's the way the numbers are working. We want to maintain communities. We want to maintain villages and town boundaries where possible. And sometimes that means changing a district that either helps or might not help an incumbent. That will not be a factor in what we do here. The maintenance of the cores of existing districts, of pre-existing political subdivisions, including cities, villages, and towns, and of communities of interest, shall also be considered. Let me go to the next part about villages in a moment, because that's going to be important to what we do. And the final criteria is that districts shall be formed so as to promote the orderly and efficient administration of elections. And that refers back to what I was talking about earlier with the election districts and trying to make it as easy as possible for the Board of Elections to administer the results of what we're doing here in this process. So let me go into a little more detail on population. So what it says in the New York State statute now is population. The difference in population between the most and least populous district shall not exceed 5% of the mean population of all districts. That's a complicated sentence. It's got a lot to do with math, but what it breaks down to is that the mean population of the 17 districts in Rockland is now, after the 2020 census, 19,918 persons. A difference of 5% of the mean would be 995 people. So the statute says no more than a difference of 5% of the mean. So the difference between the largest and the smallest district, when we're done with this process, under the law, cannot exceed 995 persons. Let me just go back a moment to the one where we had the list of populations.
Phil, can I just interrupt once again?
Yeah, sure.
I just want to note that Legislator 𝗖𝗂𝗯𝗃 has joined us. Ron is also a member of this committee. Thank you.
And you can see here in the list of districts under the 2020 census that meeting that even that 5% threshold means that nearly every district would have to change, some very significantly. Because from highest to lowest, right now, the range is from negative 2,594 to plus 4,171. So what's that? That's 6,600. But under New York State law, it can't be more than just under 1,000. So there's going to be significant changes just to balance the populations. And that's just what the New York State law requires. Then we step beyond that. And the goal last time, and it's been reiterated this time by the committee, is that we would like to aim to establish a more stringent goal of 3%. That means 597 top to bottom. And the reason for that is because, the population equality is clearly listed in this list in the statute where it says this is the priority item, this is the next priority, this is the next priority. Population is number one in priority order. And a lower deviation goal will automatically bolster the legal validity of the final map. So the closer you can get to population equality, the better off you are in having this go into effect with limited opportunity for people to challenge it in court. And that's always a concern. As you've heard, there have been challenges to the state redistricting. We're now having an extra election because of it. We want to avoid anything like that happening here in Rockland County. I think we're all in agreement on that.
I think that's a fair statement.
So then we have the building blocks. Maintenance of cores, so this is the wording out of the statute. The maintenance of cores of existing districts of pre-existing political subdivisions, including cities, villages, and towns, and communities of interest shall also be considered. This is one of the major reasons why we're here tonight. We're seeking public input on what you believe is the most important, is most important when creating the districts. While much of it is dependent on the numbers, the municipal boundaries, and compliance with the state and federal laws protecting various minority groups and their right to fair elections, the criteria related to cores of existing districts and communities of interest require your input to come up with reasonable and defensible definitions within your county and neighborhoods. So these sessions that we're having now, starting today, are critical to us setting out what this set of criteria will be and being able to defend it when we come out with the final lines. So I want everyone to understand that we thank you very much for being here today. It's going to play a critical role going forward. Villages. This is the part of the statute that's a totally new wrinkle that really affects Rockland, perhaps as much, if not more so, than most other counties in the state. To the extent practicable, no villages, cities, or towns, except those having more than 40% of the full ratio for each district, shall be divided. Rockland has many villages. In prior redistricting cycles, villages could be treated the same as hamlets or other non-incorporated parts of the towns. That is to say, they could be divided as needed to meet population, compactness, and contiguity measures. Now, this new statute requires that, to the extent practicable, no villages whose 2020 census population is less than 7,967 persons, that's 40% of the mean population of a legislative district, none of those smaller villages can be divided. This will create some necessary changes in the makeup of the districts due to Rockland having 11 villages that fall below that threshold. This map, which you cannot see the color coding on because it's too light in here, but you can see the ones that have the red labels for the village. I think you can see those. Let me zoom in a little bit on those. So you can see here, the ones in red, those villages, are the ones that fall below the threshold. The ones in the dark green are above the threshold, and therefore those villages can be divided as we're going through the process of redistricting. So again, there's a lot of villages in 𝗂𝗯𝗶 that will not be able to be divided. There are a few in Orangetown that cannot be divided. Is it okay if I take a question from the audience? Someone has a question on this?
Are there any questions on this part?
Yes.
What is the
I'm
definition
sorry. I should have done this before I asked you to speak. All of our meetings are being recorded by a stenographer, right? So if people are going to speak, ask questions, please identify yourself and where you're from.
My name is 𝗖𝗄𝗯𝗃, I live here in Orangetown. My
Thank you.
question is, what is the criteria for a village? Because it looks to me like many of these blue villages are not municipalities. Are they to be considered as villages under the law?
No. The ones that are listed shown there in gray are what are known as hamlets. For the most part, they are communities, and you can assert that as a community of interest. They should be kept together, but under the law, there's no requirement that they be kept together. So just the ones in red and the ones with the larger labels are the ones that are villages. So we have here the villages that cannot be divided. There are a total of 11 of them in the county.
I have some questions too. Should I be interrupt? I don't want to interrupt though. I mean, keep interrupting. Should I keep interrupting? Or?
We're okay, Nancy, as long as you identify
Okay.
yourself.
I have a question. My name is 𝗖𝗂𝗋𝗆𝗂𝗃, and I live in South Nyack in Orangetown. And I have a question. I guess the first question is, can you repeat what you said about well, I guess my first question is, can we get access, a copy of this presentation? Is that on the website? This full presentation?
It's not currently on the website. Yes, I'm sure we can make it available.
It will be made.
It will be
Yeah.
on the website?
Yes.
Okay, great. Because there's a lot of really important information that you've shared. But can you repeat this part about the villages and being divided? I'm
Sure.
confused.
That's why I made a whole separate section on this, because it is new and it is a little confusing. So again, as you can see here, the language says, to the extent practicable. Now, because it says to the extent practicable, that means we will be able to divide villages if there's no alternative. So for example, if you have a bunch of villages that are adjacent to each other in one corner of the county, and you have to divide one in order to connect to another area to pick up population, you would be allowed to make that cut. But you would open yourself to potential litigation if you claim that and somebody finds an alternative. So you have to be careful to only use it where it's clear that that would be the only reasonable option
So let me give you a practical example. I currently represent Legislative District 2. And Legislative District 2 is part of the Village of Pomona. For the district I represent, it's the Village of Pomona within the town of 𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂. Legislator 𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂 represents the Village of Pomona within the town of 𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂. It's one of our few villages in the county that spans two towns. When the new districts are drawn, one or the other district will have to represent all of Pomona, because Pomona is beneath the 8,000 threshold or 40% threshold. It can no longer be divided unless there is we meet all the other core standards and there's an overwhelming reason why it can't fit. But the expectation would be that the Village of Pomona would be kept intact within one legislative district going forward.
And on that note, Phil, just want to clarify for everyone's understanding is that the list in the statute is a hierarchy of importance. So for
I was
example,
about to get to that.
all right, because I know that as far as the issue of the villages, which is brand new for everyone, it is lowest on the total, that section F is lowest on the total pole of things that are important. And there's a hierarchy, so go ahead.
Yeah, and that was the point that's very important. Other than, to the extent practicable, also applies to things like you have to comply with the Voting Rights Act and the requirements of protecting minority rights for access to the polls and a fair opportunity to elect a candidate of their choice. So if keeping a village whole interferes with that, then that is subjugated to the higher criteria of compliance with the Voting Rights Act in New York State laws relating to minority rights.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
If you can go back to that map again.
Sure.
Districts of the villages.
And if you have a question, please identify yourself.
Robert Gutman, I'm from Japan. I grew up in Palisades, and I'm looking at these villages, and Palisades doesn't even exist. It's not even there.
That may be one of our biggest challenges, Mr. Gutman. A lot of people associate the hamlet or postal area that they live in with a municipal subdivision, and they're not necessarily.
Well, they even got Grandview there. They only got 246 people
But
in Grandview.
you're right, but the village.
Palisades doesn't even exist.
But Mr. Gutman, I might point out, the village of Grandview is an incorporated village in the state of New York. Palisades is a hamlet with a post office. It is a community of interest, there's no question about it, but it is not a municipal subdivision. We have 18 of those in the
So
town.
apparently they have no voting rights because they just don't exist as a
That's
community.
not true at all. They have voting rights. But there are distinctions within the law that raise towns, cities, and villages to a higher standard. And this probably is a good place to mention too, Phil. Since its inception, the Rockland County Legislature has pretty much historically been based on our smallest town, which is the town of Stony Point. Initially, Stony Point was used as the basis of districts. So there were 12,000 people in Stony Point. Haverstraw was 24,000. Stony Point got one legislator. Haverstraw got 2. Clarkstown got 5, based on everything divided by 12,000. We've grown a lot since then. At one point, we were even to meet the one person, one vote standard. We had weighted voting in Rockland County. But again, it was predicated on the smallest town within the county and its population. So that's one of the historical challenges we'll be working with. And certainly, it's something that we need to consider as part of this process.
And certainly one of the things that we're hoping to hear from you is what communities you want to bring to our attention that may not be included in these maps. So, for example, the non-village hamlets that they include here are places that are considered census-designated places. It's something that the Census Bureau is aware of as a community with defined boundaries, and that's why they are listed here. It's a CDP for short, the Census-Designated Place. And that's why those have population numbers next to them, because the census collects the data and reports it for those areas.
So I think it'd probably be easiest at this point, maybe, Phil, why don't you finish your presentation, and then we'll take folks, we'll take a list and we'll wish to speak, and then you can come up and give us your comments.
Thank you.
There's only a couple more here. So now I overlaid the county legislative districts on top of the map showing the villages. So you can see where there's colors that are not showing up here, but you can see where some villages are divided. That's particularly true in 𝗬𝗂𝗯𝗹𝗶𝗰, not so much in the area around here in Orangetown or in Clarkstown. Those villages are fully within either District 17 or District 10. But there's a lot of division going on in 𝗬𝗂𝗯𝗹𝗶𝗰 and 𝗬𝗂𝗯𝗃 in particular of these small villages, and that will have to be addressed as we move forward. So here I've zoomed in on, let's see if it'll show up a little better over here. No, still can't see the color. Oh well. So this gives the population figures for Orangetown to the district. So District 17 is underpopulated by 13. Over 13%, it's going to have to grow. So which direction can it grow in? Well, if we're going to want to keep it within Orangetown, it can either pull in the village of 𝗖𝗂𝗃, or it can move west and take some of District 16. District 16 and District 10, either direction that District 17 would move into, are both underpopulated as well. They have to grow. They're not going to grow by moving eastward or southward into District 17, because 17 is already too low. So you can see the challenges we're going to be facing, and that's why we need to know what you consider the cores of the current districts, as well as the communities of interest. All right, so finally, sorry to take so long, but I figured I'd lay everything out and give you a clear understanding as to what we're facing and the challenges involved. So we want to know from you the general guidelines that you want us to adhere to and the specifics about your community or communities of interest. You can go to the county legislature's website for other opportunities to engage with the process beyond today, to communicate your thoughts. I'd love to see any maps that you want to share with us. It will give me an opportunity to evaluate and understand what you consider a community of interest or the core of the current district. Additional materials will be posted on the website, including draft plans as the process unfolds over the next several weeks. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. I think we're ready to take questions. We did have a sign-up sheet earlier in the evening. There were only 2 names on it. If you have an additional sheet, that would be helpful. Thank you, Mary. So we can start with the people that signed up. If they, this one first, and then we'll go to everybody else.
Okay, great. Elizabeth, if I butcher your name, I apologize. Elizabeth 𝗂𝗂𝗃. Hi.
Hello, I would like to know how many hamlets that are not census designated areas, if I have the term correct, do not appear on the map. I mean, I noticed in Orangetown, I see Palisades and Spark Hill, for example. In the whole county of Rockland, how many hamlets don't appear on the map, are not census designated areas?
Let me just start with Phil answer the question. Understand that the map that you just saw is just for presentation purposes. It's not an official map.
Okay, well
It's
that's
simply
helpful to know.
for
Thank
just
you.
our
Okay.
discussion purposes. So there.
So does it matter that
It doesn't matter at all.
So to his question, to Mr. Gutman's point about Palisades not being reflected, that doesn't, the fact that it's not on that map does not
Has no
have any
impact on
bearing on
anything.
anything. Okay,
Has no
thank you.
impact on anything.
Palisades is currently represented by James Cole.
I'll speak to that specific issue, Mr. Gutman. As you can see,
Palisades is bordered on one side by the Hudson River, so we can't write this map into Westchester. And it's basically bordered on the other side by New Jersey, and we can't write the map into New Jersey. So I think in practice, it's gonna be a very small probability that anyone's gonna divide Palisades. But obviously I'll look out for our district, but I think it's pretty much impossible to divide that there. That's just my opinion. Thanks.
Does that answer your question?
It does, thank you.
Okay, great. Hey, can I just ask, Phil, if at all possible, could you put up the current legislative district map on the screen? That's part of your presentation, isn't it?
Just so how clear it was, but.
Yeah, just so people have a reference. Thank you.
Next, Deborah Mason.
Yeah, I'd like to know what is the agenda for this evening, the agenda, and how do you plan to lead us through this process?
You're talking the agenda for this meeting today?
Yes, yes.
All right, you should have,
If you haven't received the presentation.
yeah, I mean, basically, our agenda is here. Did you receive this
Yeah,
handout?
so what happens now, and what's
We're
the next
having-
step and the next step?
So we're having a meeting in each of the 5 towns to solicit public input.
Tonight, I mean,
The agenda is the presentation, and now we're listening to you to find out what the public has to say about your priorities in terms of creating these districts, what's important to you. Okay, that was the last person signed up? Yes, it's.
You signed up, I signed up, I don't know where
There's
that
two
was.
lists.
You went over it, I didn't know that was your. All right, so let's, the person behind you, just raise your hand.
Sure, I'm Clyde Letterman. My question, and I'm sorry for pronouncing your name wrong, Mr. 𝗂𝗯🗰🗂🗰. 𝗖𝗺𝗯🗰🗰🗰, my apologies. I understand that the state legislature enacted new mandates regarding partisanship, gerrymandering, and so forth. How will those affect your drafting of new maps? And then my second question is, when I walked in here, there's mention of town boundaries. Are those sort of considered absolute and final, that towns won't be split up? Or is there possible consideration that towns, obviously in the case of Stony Point, but other towns may be split between multiple legislative districts? So I guess my 2 questions are, 1, how does the legislature's, the change that happened there affect us? And then 2, how do towns factor into this process?
First, obviously, you can answer the question, but if you haven't received the handout,
I have not. My
the
apologies for
handouts,
that.
and we arrived a little late. We did cover all of this. There's a review of the new state law here
Okay.
in the handout. If you want to respond.
Thank you.
Can you repeat the first part of your question again?
Sure, I was just curious how the new state law would affect, not the process, but let's say initially how the maps will look, and so what considerations are there as the drafter.
Well, I tried to lay out exactly the priorities that were set by this new legislation. And I will be following those meticulously. And they were designed in order to prevent the kinds of gerrymanders that have happened in the past in various places throughout the state. So fairly confident that just following the criteria laid out in this new statute will go a long way towards alleviating any concerns that there's even a chance of that happening this time around.
On page 8 of the handout that you have, where it says our guiding principles, these were our guiding principles 10 years ago. They are our guiding principles tonight, and they make up the core of the new New York State law. Although the New York State law does prioritize those, which is the next step.
I answered was a part of the question. I don't think it was answered. In regards to splitting towns, currently, for example, the district we're in now, District 17, has some of West Nyack in it, which is in Clarkstown. And the district that has Nyack in it also has Valley Cottage in it, which is also Clarkstown. So the districts, it's not a hard and fast rule. There already exists where they go across town lines, so it's not absolute.
Mr. Yeager.
A little bit more expansive answer than I towns are not mentioned once in the newly enacted law. Only villages are, and cities are specifically mentioned as political subdivisions. And even then, only up until a certain amount do they have to stay together. I believe just looking quickly at the maps, if you look at them and look at the numbers that are necessary for each district, it would be impossible to draw 17 districts in Rockland County, none of which that would cross town lines and still comply with A, B, C, and D, and most of E. At best, towns would be considered communities of interest, and communities of interest is all the way down in E. And what the state legislature has done is it has prioritized these letters in order. So A is more important than B, and B is more important than C, and C is more important than D. I have not yet asked the question, to be honest, and I don't know the answer, as to whether the different items in E, because there are 5 or 6 different ones, are in order of priority within each letter. But assuming they are, towns as a community of interest is way down on the list. Now that doesn't mean that the legislature is going to chop up towns willy-nilly, but if there's a village that needs to be kept together, or there's a racial group that needs to be kept together, and in order to do that, towns have to be crossed, most likely that will happen, although there's never any guarantees in life. But the numbers just don't add up to allow us to put in 17 districts within the most important number, which is 995. And I don't know if you were here for that, but the largest district to the smallest all has to be within 995 people according to the census numbers. And so in order to do that, it would be next to it, if not actually impossible, to keep everything within town lines. But we're still going to, I believe, I think the goal.
And village lines,
Right.
because that's also a
Yes.
priority.
Right, exactly. And so keeping stuff within the lines is important, but it's not as important as some of the other stuff. And again, we are not setting those priorities. That's our wonderful elected officials up in Albany that are setting those numbers.
Thank you. So, next, Ms. Lobo.
Thank you. So, just a couple of questions, and then I have a statement that I wanted to read as my input. So the first thing is, I had the feeling that the notice on this meeting was short. This was short notice. That this series of hearings was happening so quickly. I think the notice went out last week about tonight. Is that right? I mean,
I don't recall exactly when it went out, but we issue press releases, we let the world know what we're doing. This is one of 5 meetings. This is not a Orangetown meeting. This is a meeting that happens to take place in Orangetown. Anyone is welcome to come to any of the remaining 4 sessions, which are over the next couple of weeks, and give their input. You don't have to be in Orangetown to give your input at the Orangetown meeting.
Right.
We just we set up the schedule because we wanted to have a presence in each town.
These are public forums, not public hearings. Public hearings are subject to requirements under the law. This is a special committee for redistricting. I think under our rules, we're required to make 48 hours publication of the agenda.
How much notice do you think you will be able to give for the public hearing that is going to take place in August or September?
We'll give we're going to post notice on the website. We'll give whatever notice is required under the law, just like any other public hearing.
Do you remember what that notice is?
I don't know off the top of my head.
I mean, I just think that
Say any notice that's given for adoption of the local law or anything like that.
We will meet the legal requirement.
right.
The basic timeline for this process is on page 4 of your handout.
Right.
So you get a good
That's what I
idea
was-
of where we're headed.
That's what I was looking at. Okay, and the consultant's presentation tonight is going to be on the website?
Our intention is to post all of our material on that website. The minutes of meetings, the video will be able to be accessed from there. The PowerPoint presentation that you're holding in your hand will be there. It'll be our central repository for the record of this process.
Okay, great, good. So should I just read my statement, just sitting down? Will it, is this being recorded?
If you'd like to stand, Nancy, if you'd like to stand at the
Well, I
podium
just
and
want,
read your
is this
statement,
being
that would be
recorded
fine.
somehow by
Yes.
something?
Here
And the stenographer.
I mean, it doesn't matter where I stand.
No.
I just feel weird sitting.
Okay.
So let me just,
We want you to be comfortable.
I just want to read this statement. So, good evening, everybody. I'm here as a resident of the hamlet of South Nyack and also as the executive director of the Rockland County Democratic Committee. I ask that the Redistricting Committee take into consideration the important community of interest that exists in the river villages in the towns of Orangetown and Clarkstown. Specifically, I am talking about these areas: the village of 𝗬𝗂𝗯𝗹𝗶, the hamlet of 𝗵𝗂𝗂𝗍, the village of Grandview, the hamlet of South Nyack, the village of Nyack, the village of Upper Nyack, and the hamlet of 𝗖𝗺𝗺𝗃. The residents of these villages and hamlets share similar cultural interests and similar and strong social and political values. These values translate into priorities for these residents. Included among these priorities are a concern for the environment, a commitment to the arts, a commitment to equity and inclusion, and an appreciation of the importance of diversity. It is very important that these values and norms be preserved for the residents of these hamlets and villages. These shared standards, embraced by our river village communities, are recognized regionally, and they enhance our entire county. Particularly important are the environmental issues and concerns that these villages and hamlets share, including the health of the Hudson River, the health of the Sparkill Creek and its watershed, flooding, sewage overflow, and the effects of development and climate change on all of these. Thank you for taking these comments into consideration as you move forward with this process.
Thank you, Nancy. Nancy, if you want
Thank
to
you.
leave a copy with Robin, that would be terrific.
Well, you know what, I'll send it to you.
Okay, thank you.
All right, no one else had signed up for the list. Is there anyone else that has something they want to share with us? Yes, again, can you just state your name for the record?
Tina Ironside, Orangetown. I understand that you're going to meet the legal requirements for announcing the rest of the procedure, but I have to agree with Ms. Lohogan's comment that for me, there was very short notice about tonight's meeting, and I'm wondering if there's willingness on the part of the legislators to do more than the legal requirement, to really reach out to, say, social media, reach out to people who you know can make posts on social media about the dates and so forth, so that it can be more widely dispersed. Or, really just hardly anybody's here tonight, and of course with the future meetings, hopefully there'll be more people. But that my question is whether you all would consider doing a little bit more outreach than the legal requirement.
We've already said about doing more than the legal requirement by holding these 5 town hall meetings that we've scheduled. So we're ahead of you on that, and we intend to make this as open and transparent a process as possible. There's no limitation to the number of town forums that you can attend. If you'd like to come to Haverstraw tomorrow, we start at 7 o'clock at Haverstraw Town Hall at 1 Roscoe Road, and then the schedule I think is also included and will be on the website. So we welcome all your participation. I can tell you anecdotally, we did do this process 10 years ago, and with one exception in the town of 𝗬𝗂𝗃, it was a very large turnout. This is pretty typical of what we saw, and I really do believe we had better daily newspaper coverage 10 years ago than we do now. Getting a story in the one newspaper that publishes daily here is very challenging at times. Legislator Yeager, I saw your hand.
First a question, then a comment. When did the notice for this meeting go out in any form? Do we know the answer to that
It was
question?
like last week.
I believe, I looked it up while we were speaking. It was on the Rockland County Government website 2 days ago. Not the Facebook, sorry, 2 days ago. It says 2 days.
Do you know who was there before, or did you? I mean, I was just.
I went to our email, I think, similar time.
Yeah, it was announced,
was
that we would be doing this probably a few months ago at our committee meeting. And we announced it a few weeks ago, along with the schedule, at our last committee meeting. Again, understand, this is the outreach to the community. This is not required under the law. What we're doing right now is soliciting input from the public. And I understand this is the first of 5 meetings. If you're dissatisfied, there's nothing that I can do to change your dissatisfaction. What I can encourage you to do is to come to the other meetings, invite all of your friends and family and anyone that you think is interested in this. You can post it on social media, and we hope to see you at one of the next 4 meetings, or at all the next 4 meetings. That's what this process is about. Yes?
So I have another
I'm
question.
sorry, let Mr. Yeager speak. And again, I don't want to get into a back and forth because I don't think that's productive. We're here to listen, and we certainly will do whatever we can. We want people to come to these meetings. We're not trying to hide anything. This is probably the most transparent thing that we do at the legislature. So with that, we encourage you to share all the information you have. People are free to email us their comments. You don't have to be sitting here in this room to give us comments. Send us letters, send us emails. We'd love to hear it.
Can I just ask with respect to that question about emails?
Mr. Yeager,
So can I just ask a follow-up question with, you talked about email, so I would just like to ask you, is there a particular mailbox that is accepting?
If you
It's in your handout.
Okay, well, that's just helpful to know, so I just, thank
If
you.
you look at the packets.
So there is, okay, thank you.
All right, Mr. Yeager.
I also want to address what Ms. 𝗏𝗏 said about communities of interest. It is important, of course, to keep those things together. And I'm sure that Legislator Foley and Legislator Santulli together own right now most of the areas that Legislator former Legislator 𝗏𝗏 was talking about. Will do their very best to protect their community's interests. In addition, I'm sure that the 3 Orangetown legislators, and that would include Legislator 𝗖𝗂𝗯𝗹 and Legislator 𝗏𝗏, will do their utmost to protect Orangetown's interests in all of this. I did note that former Legislator 𝗏𝗏 mentioned that she stood up here representing the Democratic Party. This isn't supposed to be no will it be, to the extent that I can allow it, a Democratic or Republican redistricting. It would just be Rockland County's redistricting, and I'm sure that all the other legislators here today, and all the ones who are not here today, share that commitment. Thank you.
All right, any closing thoughts?
I had another question, if I may.
Yes.
So,
Again, if you just take it in advance.
my name is Elizabeth Barry. I live in Tappahannock. So, the hearings are to get feedback from the community about general guidelines that we want the legislature to adhere to, and you want to hear about specifics for communities of interest. Beyond the principles that the legislature has set forth, which are here in this PowerPoint, are there other specific things, for example, Legislator Wolf, that are of interest to you in this process? I mean, it would be nice to sort of turn the tables back and hear about what the legislature, Mr. Foley, what are your priorities for communities of interest, for example?
Well, again, tonight, let me just say, it's not a public hearing, it's a forum. And it's about us listening to what you have to say. We have a lot of information. This is the first time that we're having a public forum in this process. We have 4 more public forums. We're going to get a lot of information from the public. We're going to be guided by our consultant. So, I think I speak for all of us when I say we're going to be guided by the law and carrying out our responsibility in accordance with the law in the best interest of the people of the county. Really can't say anything beyond that because there's nothing to comment on. At some point, we're going to have draft maps. Those are going to be made available to the public. There will be a public hearing where we actually are going to listen to input on a specific map. That's the way that process works. And at some point, we're going to have a vote on it. So it's really premature. Again, I think I speak for all the members of the committee. We want to comply with the law, have a map that's defensible, that we can build as much consensus on, that takes into account all the factors we're required by law to abide by.
At the same time, that you're not willing to even respond to a question about what you consider a community of interest, what's important for you in terms of community. It's strange
You're
that
asking
there's no.
You're asking me specifically, I can't answer that question. I think I answered your question, but.
You didn't, but that's okay.
A community, if you want to ask what a community of interest is, it's exactly what's been defined. A community of interest can be defined in many different ways because it is in the eye of the beholder. A community of interest could be a group of people who speak the same language. It could be a village, it could be a town. It could be a hamlet. It could be folks who have a similar commercial interest. It could be folks who have a similar religious interest or a cultural interest and all of that. That's what a community of interest is. That's and I understand that's what I see a community of interest.
Thank you. I wanted to know. I appreciate that.
I think former legislator 𝗖𝗂𝗯𝗹𝗶𝗰 remarks from the podium were exactly what was a cogent description of a community of interest and why she believes they belong together as a group. In another part of the county, maybe because they share borders with state or federal park plans, those kinds of things.
Great.
But I think if you can outline what's important to you and to others, the way that Nancy did, I think that would be very helpful to this committee.
Excellent. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Sorry.
Thank you. What is the legal requirement for adopting new districts?
I'm sorry for.
Adopting new districts.
We have a public hearing and we pass a local law.
So it's the legislature just, like it's not like a referendum or anything.
Well, we're charged with passing a local law. I believe the local law is subject to referendum. Theoretically, it's subject to referendum.
Permissive referendum.
Like most, it's permissive referendum, just like most local laws of the, many local laws.
What does that mean?
Okay,
What is a permissive referendum?
That means that if someone wishes to subject it to a referendum, they need to collect signatures. And I don't know off the top of my head all of the details and everything, but that's what a permissive referendum.
But otherwise, it's just the legislators voting on the proposed districts.
It's a local law, just like any other local law that's adopted. We have a public hearing, and then if it's a majority votes to the legislature, then the local law is adopted by the legislature.
That's what the legislature does, it adopts laws. This is a law.
And again, yes.
Since you're asking for feedback, this is a meeting for your requesting feedback. I would just like to say that as a resident of Rockland, I find the tone that you have taken, Mr. Wolf, it to be extremely adversarial and unnecessarily combative, and to treat members of the public who have legitimate questions like they're idiots and to lecture them is inappropriate. And I would just like to say that I don't appreciate that.
I'm sorry for coming off like that. That's certainly not my intent.
Well, that was
I
how
don't
you
think
came off.
anyone in this room is an idiot. What I'm trying to do is go down a flow here and maintain a flow.
Well, there's a process of education that this is about, presumably. And
I
so
understand,
I
and
think
that's
we
why we
deserve,
have-
as members of the community, we deserve to be spoken to with respect.
And that's why we have the handouts. If you have any specific questions you want to follow up on, feel free to give me a call at the office. I'll meet you for a cup of coffee if you want, whatever you'd like. I'm happy to make myself available.
Is there anything else for the good of the cause? John?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm in my first term. I represent a portion of Orangetown, Chestnut Ridge, and Bardstown. So my district, District 15, is in 3 different municipalities. And like I said, in my first term, I ran in 2019, and this process was a major part of when I spoke to constituents, I spoke to folks who were going to be in my district throughout the county when I was campaigning. The redistricting process was a major discussion point. And this concept of communities of interest is something that's important, particularly in Nanuet, which I represent about half of Nanuet. And Nanuet, I think, is in maybe 4 or 5 legislative districts. So I heard folks when I ran, I continue to hear their concerns, and I will take that with me and advocate for them during this process. And I think we're all trying to do that. And I think it's kind of a balancing act, right? We've gone through the legal requirements, what has to be done according to the law. There's new law that was passed. But I know constituents in my district have expressed to me concerns about not being divided. Pearl River is where I live, where I grew up. I consider that a community of interest. But Pearl River, which is a hamlet, has been divided in half. Chestnut Ridge is a village, been divided in half. And again, as I said, Nanuet has been parceled up as well. It's a difficult thing, but I think what you're doing and expressing your concerns to us, if you want to attend the other meetings, welcome, talk to your friends, and I'm going to reach out to my constituent base as well, and continue to gain their input to do this. But you know, it could be a difficult task, kind of putting a puzzle together. But I know certainly, and I believe I speak on behalf of my colleagues in the legislature, we're gonna do that within the confines of the law and everything we can to make this a fair and balanced matter.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Ms. Ironton.
The 17 legislative districts, did I pick up that they were determined based on the population of Stony Point originally?
If you go back to 1969-70, when the first legislature was convened, New York State law requires a board of supervisors, and clearly there was unequal population across Rockland's 5 counties. So there was
Legal challenge by the legal
a legislature was created, but they used Stony Point at that point in time as the basis for building the legislature, because the idea was that it shouldn't be excluded from being represented on the legislature. That was your basic unit, then you could build from there. For years it was. Divide the next town by the Stony Point's population and you would get the number of legislatures. I think we grew to as much as 21. And then there was a period of time, I guess it was a 𝗖𝗂𝗯𝗶 versus the County of Rockland, which was a Supreme Court case that required it to be 1 person, 1 vote, and there was weighted voting after that. And again, I think it was predicated on the size of Stony Point, which was the smallest town within the county, and it was weighted voting. And it was, I think it was up to like 24 votes, but not everybody had the same voting power. And then we convened to 17 legislative districts with all approximately having the same vote. And that has historically been an intention to make sure that Stony Point would be able to elect a representative to the county board. Okay? That's on an historical basis.
But I'm curious about the number 17. If that's statutory at this point?
It is.
It's in our charter. Theoretically, the charter can be amended to increase or decrease the number of legislators,
But then the charter
it is in the charter.
Then that has to go to a
Oh, is it?
referendum.
Oh, sure. So we can change the administrative code?
Still by local law subject to referendum.
Right. Okay.
Pardon my hand, it's so much.
Sorry. Can you move your chair?
Hold on.
I just wanted to say one thing. I want to address actually what both of these people were saying, just to make it clear. You had asked about towns being kept alone and crossing town lines. And Legislator Yeager was saying, well, I don't really see how. You need to understand that Stony Point itself has fewer than the number of required residents for a legislator. I think it's something like 17,000 now. I may be off a little bit. And the districts at this point are going to have to be close to 20,000. So town lines will have to be crossed. Stony Point cannot stand alone. So just so you have that picture in your mind.
And it can only push in one direction. It's bordered on the east by the Hudson River and on the northwest by the County of Orange. So that's the push west and south. Okay, go ahead, Phil.
I'd just like to conclude the comments this evening by reiterating the importance of receiving input from the public, defining communities of interest. And keep in mind when doing so that the larger the community of interest, the harder it is to keep it together. So to me, it would be helpful to have definite boundaries that you consider when you have a community of interest, where the center of it is, where the core of it is, and how far it might extend. Those are very important to establishing the communities and determining to what extent they can be kept whole within a district. So I want to make that clear for the people in this room and for anyone watching and streaming.
It's a very important point. The legislative districts have to conform to a geographic area. They have to conform to election districts. So you want to make sure that if you've identified a community of interest and it's, I don't know, John, how would you define Pearl River from Gilbert Avenue in? I don't.
The zip code, right? I mean, whatever. So Gilbert Avenue.
The zip code's going to be too big, probably, for a single district, right?
I don't know. I'd have to. I mean, yes, when I think it is, I mean, it's within the zip code of Pearl River and what streets that we found where that, you know, pretty much from Gilbert Avenue, New Jersey, up until Town Line Road, and then kind of over by the Palisades and. I think that's what you're asking?
Yeah, because again, it's going to have to conform to a map somewhere.
Right.
And there'll be election districts associated with it, within the legislative district, you know, town boundaries, et cetera.
And it would help me to understand what the core area is, the downtown area, so to speak, of these hamlets.
The parade route.
Well,
Well, the other thing
if you
is-
give me a map of the parade route, that would be helpful.
The other thing is, we're bound by the election districts, right? Are we allowed to
No.
divide election districts again?
No, we can split election districts. My goal is to minimize that as much as possible.
Because
Make
that
it
makes
as
it more-
easy to implement. as
Right, that makes it more difficult.
That's lowest on the priority.
Right, but it makes it more difficult for the people running the election.
One of our goals is to make sure that the elections can be properly and efficiently administered. So we're going to do our best to not split elections.
And as a former elections administrator, I understand what they go through in that process.
There's a whole language that goes with the shape files and census tracts and all of that the geographers need to deal with. But that's it. Again, to the extent that if you are going to advocate for community of interest, clearly define the boundaries to the best of your ability so that we know what Phil can work with.
I guess that's just a technical question for the consultant. Let's say I want to submit a recommendation saying X, Y, and Z is a community interest. What's the best way to define it? Census tracts and then block by block, sort of a meets and bounds type description? What would be easiest for you?
If you have access to the publicly available redistricting software that's publicly available, no charge, Dave's Redistricting
Yeah.
is the one that most people are familiar with. You could draw a map using that, using the census blocks and census boundaries, and submit that. That would work great.
Okay, thank you.
I hope that was helpful. Anyone else? Members of the committee? Legislators that are not members of the committee? Anyone else in the public? If not, I'll take a motion to adjourn. Legislator Yeager, second by Legislator Earl. All in favor, aye. Opposed? We're adjourned. Thank you.